Welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to Professor David Patterson's talk. David Patterson probably needs no introduction. He's been a professor of computer science at University of California, Berkeley for 40 years now. And he's made a lot of pioneering contributions in computer systems, a lot of which are technologies we use at Google and elsewhere. So RISC, reduced instruction set computers, RAID, Network of Workstations, and a lot more. He has a pretty long bio here. I didn't realize he has won 35 awards, and all of them are pretty prestigious. National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Sciences, Silicon Valley Engineering Hall of Fame, IEEE von Neumann Medal, and I'm sure I'm offending some significant award by not saying that, but he's had a very distinguished career. And this talk today, in his own words, collects advice that I wish I had been given when I started my career. And given how distinguished that's been, I think it's a talk we are all going to benefit from. So welcome.
Well, this is what happened is I decided, somebody wrote me, these slides about how to have a bad career have been out there for a long time, and they asked me if there was a video of it, and I couldn't find one. I actually figured out that I gave this talk first 20 years ago, but I've given it over the years. So I decided to record it at Berkeley. And it ended up, and I announced that my plans to retire that went 2 days before this, so it got a lot of visibility. So, and it's fun to come here. As far as I can tell, all of my, as far as I can tell, hold on. All of my former students are going to end up here sometime. Also, I have to ask them if they're leaving where they are. I know where they're ending up, and it feels like it's old home week here. As I said, this is the advice I wish I would have had in my career. This got started about 30 years ago. Decided I wanted to give advice on talks, so I wrote How to Give a Bad Talk, and that was a lot of fun. And about 10 years later, How to Have a Bad Career, and about a couple of years ago, I did How to Have a Bad Research Center. So this is my bad series. Now, I'm just going to put the if you're interested, these slides are certainly available as well as the talk, and there's a lot of papers and things that you can cite if you want to read more about it. And I'd like to thank a bunch of people for making suggestions that I've incorporated, or their careers inspired them. One of those two. The parts, there's two parts to the talk, the kind of tongue-in-cheek how to have a bad career, and then how to avoid a bad career, and then I'll open up for questions and answers. And then I'll wrap things up whenever we have to wrap things up, and take the last 5 or 10 minutes talking about my story, how I got here, and what works for me. So you want to be a leader of the field, especially if you're in academia. So how can you do that? Well, invent a new field is a really good way to do that. And you want to be the only person in that field. So how can you invent a field and be the only person? Well, one way is, different from other fields, you want to be the Lone Ranger, and a way you can be the Lone Ranger, the only one that is there, is your personality can help. If you adopt the prima donna personality, and some people don't know what a prima donna is, but if you adopt that personality, nobody will want to work with you, and you can drive people away, and then you'll be the world's leading expert because you're the only one in that field. In terms of the research horizons for your new field, you want to have a lot of flexibility on success. You don't want to get too fine. And if you say it's 20 years out, then you got 19 safe years, right? And nobody's going to accuse you of doing engineering work if it's 20 years out. And stick to that topic for your whole career. Now, if I'd only followed that advice, my dissertation was on microprogramming. If I'd stuck to this, I would absolutely be the world's expert in microprogramming, partly because no one's built a computer with microcode in 25 years. And you kind of think of it like, it's like fashion. Like skinny jeans are popular now, or they were popular 25 years ago. If you just kept them, you could reuse your own jeans. So research is like that. So wait, they'll come back to you. Okay. Let complexity be your guide. Confuse thine enemies. The best thing you can say, it's so complicated, I can't understand what you're talking about. Now that you've done a good job. One reason is it's easier to claim credit for things. If somebody else has done some work, you can say, well, that was in my paper, and since they don't understand it, how can they contradict you, right? The other thing that's surprising, it's really a lot easier to be complicated. You read the first N papers, and then you figure out the next one and people publish it. It's really much harder to be simpler than to be complicated, so that's the easy way to do it. And this sentence captures it, right? If it's unsimple, how could you distinguish colleagues and departments around the world, be positively appreciative, and so on and so on. There you go. That's the way to speak and to talk. Never be proven wrong. The first thing you want to do is don't implement anything. It's hard to prove you wrong if you don't implement it. Now, if some out-of-control colleague builds something, then whatever you do, don't run any quantitative experiments. If they're not quantitative, then you can't be proven wrong. You've got the intuition. You can just kind of extrapolate what the results there are, put that in without any experiments. And your job isn't to help the critics. That's their job to figure out. Don't help them out. Now, another reason is that clearly the success of the career is to publish as much as you can, and it takes time to build and to measure. So if you don't do that, you can get more results and have a more successful career. If somebody does it, the last thing you want to do is run any benchmarks, because then they could compare your results to other things. The advice of being that you've got those safe years, and the benchmarks can just, the way you get out of that is to say, well, this computer is for future programs, not for current programs, and then these benchmarks are too antiquated to run on my computer. Now, the other thing that we do in computer science is we reject all the past. We're a new field, we're both science and engineering, so we're not hidebound by old-fashioned things like the scientific method. We have the computer scientific method. Instead of a hypothesis, we have a hunch. A sequence of experiments. We know that sequential is slow, so what we do, we change one experiment, all the parameters at once. That's much faster than the sequential approach. Parallelism is a good idea. And rather than prove or disprove a hypothesis, we discard if it doesn't support the hunch. There's lots of data. It's a big data. Throw away the data. There's still plenty of data left. And document for others to reproduce. We've already done it. We'll have more results of the field if we don't waste our time trying to reproduce each other's results. That's the computer scientific method. Don't be distracted by others. Avoid feedback. A big part of that is conversation, and if you don't say anything, people might think you're not very smart. So the corollary of that is loud is smart, okay? So be loud in conversations, even when you don't know what you're talking about. People will think you know what you're talking about. If you're the world's leading expert, you don't really need to read other things because you're the expert, right? And you don't have to interact with others because they're not as good as you are. In terms of doing reviews for paper, if it's simple and obvious, insult the prior authors. If you accepted something simple and obvious, they probably thought of it, so you should reject it. If they're quantitative results, and I've gotten this review before, well, I already knew that, so there's no surprise to reject it. And just, everything else you might as well just reject. They're kind of competitors to you in some way, and if their paper doesn't get published, then you win, so that's a good guideline. Now, publishing journals is technology transfer. You're the leading person in the world. You're the expert. All you have to do is write in a journal. It's not your job to make it understandable to others, to the ordinary engineers. Going to conferences just wastes some of your valuable time that you could be coming up with new ideas. And having to interact with industry and things like that, that's a time waster. You write the journals, you're done. Now, clearly the winner is the one with the most papers at the end of the career, so I've come up with this pyramid of success for publication, and it follows the rule of 4. And the guideline is the LPU, least publishable unit. The LPU is good for you. So you start off with one idea, then with rule of 4, you get 4 journal papers out of that. With the miracle of world processing, then you can get 16 extended abstracts and 64 technical reports from one single idea. That's 84 publications. Guess that. And then in terms of getting credit for it, my advice is to change your name to the Swedish spelling of Anderson. and then there's awkward time. Oh, how are we going to put the authors on the table? You just say, well, I've always done it alphabetically. All my papers are that. All right. Writing commandments for a bad career. Thou shalt not define terms. That's what dictionaries are before. And explaining things, that'll just insult the reader. So you want to be a little bit more mysterious than that. Thou shalt replace I will build with I have been built. probably by the time your paper gets published in a journal, somebody will have implemented it, so it's okay to kind of do that. Thou shalt not mention drawbacks to your report. That's not your job. That's the job of the critics to figure out drawbacks. If you hide that, they'll never notice it. Thou shalt not reference any papers, again, except for maybe your own or at your institution. And if the papers were any good, they'd be people at your institution, so don't do that. And then you should publish before implementing, because that's when your system is the fastest. Okay. Talk commandments for a bad career. This is my bad career talk. Thou shalt not be neat. Why take the time to spend it on your slides to, fix spelling errors, grammatical errors? You could spend that time on research. Thou shalt not waste space. You use up a lot of slides. That's a lot of kilobytes being wasted there. You can save like 100 kilobytes a year, which saves some money. Thou shalt not covet brevity. Do you really want to sustain the stereotype that engineers can't write, right? You want to show full paragraphs, beautiful English, and read it aloud. Thou shalt cover thy naked slides. I'll show you what I mean by that later, but you don't want to expose the whole slide to everybody and shock them. Thou shalt not print large. The important people sit in the front, right? So who cares about the guys in the back? Thou shalt not use color. Use of color indicates uncareful research. You're emphasizing some words over others, and it's just too showy to use color. Thou shalt not illustrate. Confucius says a picture's worth 10,000 words. Who cares about the wisdom of the ages, right? And thou shalt not make eye contact. You want to be humble, kind of pretend to be humble, keep your eyes down, and try not to let anybody see you. Thou shalt not skip slides in a long talk. I guarantee in this room somebody has looked at their watch, see how many slides they have, and their solution is, I'll just talk faster, right? That's what people do. You prepared the slides, they want to see them all, and if you have to, just cut off the conclusions, the last couple of slides, if you run out of time. And then this is the golden rule. This one can save you even if you violate the others. Thou shalt not practice. How can you be spontaneous if you practice, right? It'll feel practiced if you practice. So don't do that. That's the last thing you should do. So here's an example of doing it. It actually says PowerPoint, but it's using Google Slides. So trying these commandments. So print small. Now these features, some engineer at Google put these features in, so you have to use them to be a good Google employee. So you want to hide your naked slides there. That's some variety, but again, no use of color. There you go. That's another dramatic entrance. And then the next one is just my favorite. I'm glad somebody put the time in to put this in because it's very useful. There you go. Okay, so that was the bad career advice. Let's talk about alternatives career. This is taken from my career, which spanned 40 years, so it's kind of an academic. I hope it'll apply to here. It's in systems, not in theory. And I'll go through these pieces one by one. So advice to writing bad papers. And I put some writing tips there. The writing tips actually have some grammatical errors in them, following my bad tradition. But you can go take a look. So do the opposite of the bad paper commandments. Do define your terms. Distinguish will do from have done. If you're writing for critical review, reviewers are very skeptical people. They're going to assume the worst. They are much more impressed if you point out the drawbacks rather than they have to discover them. And you have to measure performance and reference the work to be a scholar. And the good news is, you guys build a wonderful service to make that much easier to do these days in Google Scholar. The best piece of advice I ever got was to read Strunk and White. Strunk believed in brevity so much, he cherished brevity so much, he couldn't write a long book. The book itself is maybe 80 pages or so, and it's chock full of good advice. Then, we do this. The advice is basically go kind of top down. You just write a one-page outline with a tentative title with budgets, how much you need to write. A lot of writing. That saves a lot of writing if you don't have to do it. Then a paragraph map, which is a topic sentence as it goes the way through, and it includes figures and captions. Even today in 2016, it takes forever on a computer to draw a figure. And since you might throw that, you're probably going to throw that figure right or change it. The best technology to do that today is go to a whiteboard. You can have colored pens, take a little cell phone picture and stick that in your document. That'll take you, 1/10 the time as trying to do something on a computer, because, you might throw it away. And then we write the draft. I like the Scientific American style, which has really long captions. Not everybody does that, but you can move text in there and associate with the figure. I think that works well. I really like tables a lot. There's a lot of dreary facts. I love putting them into tables. That works well for me. Then in terms of when you're starting to polish the text, read aloud. Your ear is better than your eyes. When I start reading a document and I forget and I stop saying it out loud, I lose track. But if you hear the words, you can hear terrible sentences and grammatical errors if you hear it. There's technology. In fact, I just learned about this thing. It was from an English professor who taught a massive open online course at Berkeley. He said, why aren't you using a grammar checker? And she said, this is the world's best one, Pearson Writer. And it costs you a whole $20 a year, and it will prevent terrible grammatical errors, and it even helps style. In fact, I was thinking you guys should buy this. it's one of the things you're missing from Google Documents and this is the world's best one. I'm impressed that they can pull this off. And then you get feedbacks and friends. Of course, to get feedbacks and friends, if you're writing to a deadline, you actually have to get it done early, which seems to be science fiction for graduate students, at least. But you get it done early, then it gives you time to give your friends feedback. You can iterate. And if you don't do that, if you're writing something for review, then who's your reviewer? It's the program committee. And what I've seen sitting on program committees is a lot of the times the paper gets rejected, not because you didn't do something, it's because the program committee didn't understand what you did. And if you interact with outsiders, you've got this chance of clearing that up, that if you don't, as opposed to if you just look at it yourself. Okay, how to not write bad papers. Bad talks, basically do the opposite of the bad commandments. There's two parts, preparation and practice. Most people take about 2 minutes a slide. For some reason, I take 1 minute a slide. I don't know why. You should plan on that a minute or minute and a half so you have plenty of time and leave time for questions, since that's some of the most important parts. Despite Google engineers putting in spinning text, don't do that. And then, it's not a speech, it's the first time you do it. It's a talk, so you don't have to memorize it, but have notes ready. Practice is the key. You want to do dry runs with friends to get feedback. If you're giving a professional talk, the way you make impression is not only to give a talk, but how you answer the questions. I think for those of us in the field a while, when you see somebody give a dynamic talk and they really nail the questions, you pay attention to that. And then so your practice ought to have really tough questions so you can practice tough questions. And then with modern cell phones, you can record yourself. Not only your audio, you can watch yourself. It's, I got to tell you, it's going to be a humbling experience. You'll hear the crutches that you have in your verbal speech. I start a lot of sentences with so, I say huh. You'll be shocked how bad it is, but everybody does it, and this is the way you get better. And I practice everything. I think of it, I practice my talks just to show the students that you're supposed to practice your talks, but I practice my award acceptance speeches, and they tear them apart. I would think an acceptance speech is pretty good, but no, they make them better. So practice. Okay, now the other thing that I was going to do in this talk is quote Richard Hamming. Richard Hamming actually came to Berkeley when I was young and a professor, a larval professor, and he gave this talk, You and Your Research, which is more or less how to do great research like me. And so Richard Hamming of Hamming code, Hamming distance, the reason memories don't make mistakes, spent his career mostly at Bell Labs. And it's pretty clear from watching these videos, he's a very opinionated guy. He's not saying, well, maybe you should do this. He says, do this. But he watched careers over Bell Labs. He saw people fail. He saw people succeed. And I'll quote him, show 1 minute segments every time. So this is him talking about the importance of communication. And you'll get his personality from this one.
Which brings me to the topic of communication. You need to learn to communicate orally in talks like this, written in written reports, and casual conversations. In the middle of a conference, you have to be able to get up and say, that's wrong for these reasons, bing, 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 and you win. If you sit around and say, well, I'll write a report tomorrow after I've thought about it some more, the decision is made, we go ahead, and it doesn't matter what you do then. The ability to communicate at 3 levels. Now, how do you learn it? You can read books if you want to, but forget it. The way you learn, as far as I'm concerned, is every time you go to a talk, you listen not only to the talk, but to the style it's done. What talks are effective? Why were they effective? What aspects of the speaker can you adapt?
Okay, that's Richard Hamming, and then
Which brings me to the topic of communication. You need to learn to communicate orally in talks like...
Stop, Richard. And then he, there's another, he gave this talk lots of times. This is the one that's on your YouTube, right? And so I found it, but there was a text one before, and he said, in my early days, I think you should spend as much time in polishing and presenting as you did on the original research. Now at least 50% of it has to go in the presentation. Now, if you know Hamming's idea of how do you encode memory, it's beautifully presented that almost everybody can understand. So that was an example of him. He thought, not just came up with the math, but he laid it out and had a very simple encoding thing. It's almost like a parlor trick. Is you can put a bit pattern in there and tell you which one is wrong from the way he does it. He made it very easy to understand. And as a result, every single computer in the world uses his idea. But that was an example of him following his own advice.
This
Come on,
written.
Yep. All right, I think I can get stopped. Okay. Okay, leading a project. Now I'm going to go through the, I think I said this. So academics have bad benchmarks, papers, or maybe even citations rather than impact is what you're trying to do. I didn't realize when I started I have 6 phases for leading a project, and we'll go through those: selecting a problem, picking a solution, running a project, finishing a project, evaluating it, and transferring technology. So let me go through each of those. Let's go back to Richard Hamming again. He's going to talk about the importance of picking a problem.
And so I said, do you mind if I join you? So I sit down and we start talking about chemistry and such.
Set the stage here. So here's this pretty opinionated guy who studies how people can be great. It's kind of a hobby of his. So he, at Bell Labs, one of the greatest research institutions in the history of this country, he's been having lunch with physicists, but they started winning Nobel Prizes, inventing the transistor and things like that, and got promoted. So he had to find a new group. So he decided to hang out with the chemists. So he just kind of butts his way in as this outsider to talk with the chemists.
Things for a long while. And finally, one day, I walk in and say, if what you're working on is not important, and it's not likely to lead to important things, why are you working on it? After that, I ate with the engineers. That was spring. In the fall, going down the long corridor of Bell Labs, my friend chemist stopped me and said, you know, Hamming, that remark of yours got underneath my skin. I've spent the summer thinking about the important problems in my field. I have not changed my research, but I think it was well worth the time. I say, thank you, Dave, and walk on. About 2 weeks later, I noticed he's made head of the department. About 10 or 12 years ago, I noticed he is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. I have never heard of anything about any other person at that chemistry table. Not one. The one man who could hear, if what you're doing is not important, not likely important, why are you doing it? The one man who did become important. He did succeed. The rest of them who couldn't hear, didn't. It's that simple. If you don't work on important problems, you are not going to do important things except by the dumbest of dumb luck.
And you realize when he's giving these talks, the chemists that he was sitting with were still around and could hear him give these talks. That's a charming guy. Okay, so selecting a problem. When I started at Berkeley, I just jumped in, and I'll tell you about it in the next one. Invent a new field and stick to it? Nope. Try and do real stuff. Make sure other people think it's important, not just you. It's particularly easy to do that in academia. You're aiming for this positive impact, big impact on computer science and engineering. And stick to it to your whole career. I think in this that's not what I did. In this fast-moving field, why not instead do a bunch of short projects? Because a lot of research projects aren't going to work. It always, these things always take longer than you expect. And you know, how are you going to know if you work on something for 20 years that this is going to be an important problem for 20 years? And what we found by doing lots of 5-year projects is that learning was more of the number of projects than it was the number of years. As you tackle something, it was the new thing you learned from. And then a lot of times, as I'll say, research doesn't work out, and you'd like to fail, you know, fail sooner rather than fail later. What's worked well for us is multidisciplinary, multi-investigator projects, trying to have somebody from multiple fields on a single team. And then to try and figure out the strengths and weaknesses of your local environment. Universities are different. There's strengths that obviously Google has, and there's weaknesses too, so try and figure out something that matches your environment. And make sure it's exciting that you want to work on it for several years. And what I've found is a compelling prototype that can, if we can build this thing, it's really going to be amazing, is inspirational. Okay, so that's selecting the problem. My first project, when I got to Berkeley 40 years ago, I spent about a week thinking about it and joined some other faculty, and it was ridiculously ambitious. 3 hardware faculty, we design our own instruction set, build our own chips, build our own interconnection, network switches, boards, systems, operating systems. We didn't have any experience in any of it. We didn't have any research funding. We didn't have any computing or CAD tools. So what happened from all that? You know, a couple of papers, right? Not bad for academics. Fortunately, I took a sabbatical during that time and went away and gave me a chance to think about things differently, and I came back and did the RISC stuff. Otherwise, I wouldn't have tenure today. Picking a solution, let complexity be your guide. No, keep things simple unless you've got a really good reason not to. I came up with this phrase early in my career, is intelligence beans. On any project, you have a sack of intelligence beans that you get to spend. So decide where you want to spend your intelligence beans. And then where it doesn't matter, you know, you can use the common solutions. And the best result you can possibly get is afterwards for them to say, anyone could have thought of that, right? That doesn't seem so complicated. Anybody could have thought that. That's that you've achieved things well. Complexity costs everything, you know, longer design, construction, testing, and debugging, and these delays lessen the impact of what you do, so try and keep it simple. It's hard to keep things simple, but that's the goal. The computer scientific, nope. You want to run experiments to discover real problems. As my friend John Osterhout says, you use your intuition to ask questions, not to answer them. We're really smart people. We can make up what we think the answer is, but that doesn't mean they're right. What we need is to figure out the experiments to figure out the real answers. So, you know, at Berkeley they asked me, well, how do you pick a problem and solution? What we've done over these years, these 5-year projects, is we start, before the end of our project, we start meeting for at least a year to start talking about what the next one will be. We spend that much time thinking about it. Typically, what we've done is saying, what are some interesting technology trends that are happening over the next 5 or 10 years that will shape the future of computing 8 to 10 years out? To see if the mix of these trends have some new opportunity. For RISC, it was probably computer scientists were being able to do integrated circuit design. There was Moore's law that was taking off, so a 32-bit microprocessor was plausible. What's the right way to design such a microprocessor? For RAID, personal computers were getting popular. They started building hard disks for them, these so-called small hard disks. They were inexpensive. Performance for input-output was slow. Processors were getting faster because of RISC. Disk performance was slow. Maybe we could do something with a lot of them. For the network of workstation projects, not only were workstations getting really fast, but there were beginning to be local area network switches. Could we just build a big computer out of a bunch of these components, and then how would that work? You know, another thing that we've noticed over the years is when you're all by yourself and you're going to work in a new field, it's very scary. But if there's a group of you with different areas and you kind of go after this thing, there's kind of safety in numbers. You aren't all risking your careers working on machine learning, but the 3 of you working together seems not quite as scary to be able to do that. And you know, the big thing is to, when you've got these ideas, is to find people whose opinion you trust and try and get their feedback to help you shape your vision. You don't have to do exactly what they say, but you ought to hear what they're saying. And then pick a good name. Apparently in some parallel universe, I'm in the marketing department, but it's not that hard. You know, I have these friends who show off their their Latin education who pick some name that nobody can possibly spell, and they even have a word for it now. You pick the name and then you backfill in the acronym, and so they're called backronyms, right? Nobody's ever going to remember that. One of the projects my younger colleagues picked is Aspire. It's actually 11 or 12 words. Nobody but him can remember it. So if that's true, you're going to use the acronym model. It's got to be 3 or 4 letters if anybody's going to remember it. You want to, the way we do it is put a bunch of words on the wall that describes the project. Vowels are really valuable, and you want to try 3 or 4 letters. 3 or 4 letters that are an English word that kind of have something to do with the project. So, but I'm available as a consultant. Running a project. Do you want to avoid feedback? That's one of the themes. No, we do these periodic project reviews with outsiders. We've been doing them for 30 years. Twice a year, 3-day retreat. How many people here have been to a Berkeley-style retreat? All right, that's like a dozen people here. The outsiders are valued, and it's huge benefits to doing this. At the end, we get the feedback from everybody, and we don't argue with that feedback. We try and understand it. It also creates deadlines, which are tough everywhere, but particularly in academia. It builds team spirit. And for the people working on it, it gives them a chance to communicate and spread their ideas, interact with others. Consider a mid-course correction. Our first project that I was doing, it was a multiprocessor. The RISC ideas were just starting to catch on, but they hadn't been commercial yet. But by midway through the project, there were commercial chips like MIPS and Spark. We should have redirected our project to be used at commercial processors, but I felt like that was, breaking our promise, and we should have stuck with the ones that we did customly. But we would have had a much bigger impact with a multiprocessor RISC project than if we'd used commercial instruction sets. So that's part of our culture now. It's a 5-year project, 2.5 years in. Maybe the world has changed in some way, and you should take advantage of it. An example of that would have been the RAD Lab, which was a couple of projects ago. We were doing internet services, and then cloud computing got popular in it. So we, embraced that, and that became a big theme of the RAD Lab. Pick the size and the members of the team carefully. Tough personalities are hard on everybody, not just tough personalities for faculty, even tough personalities for students, right? It can make it no fun to come to work, so try and get good people. I think Berkeley consciously tries not to hire prima donnas, which makes it nicer. And if you have one expert per area, it's a little easier. My colleague, Kathy Yellick, I've got opinions about programming language compilers, but when she speaks, I listen, right? And that makes it easier to do things. Don't be distracted by others. This is not going to be so radical for you guys, but about 10 years ago, we went to an open collaborative thing where we got rid of faculty offices. What was happening is that the students were staying home because the computers were just as fast, the networks just as fast as home as they were at work. And whether this is good for a company or not, I'll leave to you, but it's terrible for research because it's not just put your head down and plow ahead. You got to talk to people because you're not sure where you're supposed to be going. So we put it into the open space, and now that I've read about it, what you're shooting for is communication and concentration. So people can come into work, they have to be able to concentrate enough to get the work done, but you want to have spontaneous communication, which leads to innovation. So bump into each other and have meeting rooms. We've got the meeting rooms optimized for discussions and phone calls. Jeff Waltz brought us probably 10 years ago, and we saw what you guys did with your conference rooms, and we imitated that. And like you guys, we have kitchens and free drinks. We can't do food, but we can do drinks. And the amazing thing, it accelerates research. Who would have thought space could accelerate research? It was startling what happened. We went from faculty offices that had kind of whiteboards there that were filled with faculty reminders. When you came in, you got to work on like 1 square foot to put your idea in there. Instead, we had giant whiteboards. There was no writing. You couldn't reserve it, and the high-tech way we copied it was with cell phones. It became stimulating. People came in more. There was more spontaneous meetings. And then we noticed the 0 to 60 time for new people went incredibly faster by having that kind of environment. So Matej Zaharia, in his second semester there, he gave a talk at Carnegie Mellon, and we'd never had anybody do that before. Now Matej Zaharia, who's the founder of Spark, did a lot of good things, but it wasn't obvious then that he was going to be that good, as it turned out, and so maybe that had something to do with it. And so Richard Hamming has opinions on this based on his experience, which I'm sure you're not surprised. Okay, he's got two opinions. The first one is open versus closed doors, and the only way he can have this opinion was to keep track of all of his colleagues, which ones kept the doors closed, which ones were open, and which ones were successful. And here's his ideas.
The example I've given you already is working with a door closed or open. If you work with your door closed, you won't be interrupted, you get your work done. You work with your door open, people come by and stop and chat and so on and so on. But I've noticed very clearly at Bell Laboratories, those who work with the door shut may be working just as hard 10 years later, but they don't know what to work on. They are not connected with reality. Those who had the door open may very well know what's important. Now, I cannot prove to you whether the open door causes the open mind or whether the open mind causes the open door. I suspect of both. I can only establish the correlation, and it was quite spectacular. Almost always. The guy with the door closed were often very well able, very gifted, but they seem to work always on slightly the wrong problem. So you have to get wide feeling for what is going on.
Okay. And then he believed that so much that this is how his patterns, how he handled Friday afternoons. About the importance, especially for researchers, you can start work really hard, but you could miss the really important thing by not interacting.
At the urging of some other people, partly, and partly of my own, I used to set aside Friday noon and Friday afternoon for great thoughts. Meaning, yes, I'll answer a telephone, yes, I'll sign a sheet of paper, but mainly, what is the effect of computing on science? What the hell am I doing with this computing machine? How is it going to affect AT&T? What should I be doing with computing? What is the nature of software? My friends all after a while got to know. Friday afternoons, great thoughts. What's the nature of this, that, and the other thing? I spent 10% of my time trying to answer the question, what are the important problems in my field? 10%. Friday afternoon, straight through. Don't do it Monday morning because you'll be interrupted immediately. If you do it Friday afternoon, some of it can linger over on the Saturday and Sunday. If you do it Monday morning, there's a hot conference at 10 o'clock and bingo, everything's broken up. I use it Friday afternoon for many, many years. I recommend that you find a regular time to stop and think. What are the important things? What is going on? What is the nature of what you are doing? What is the characteristic of the job? What are the fundamentals behind it? So you'll have some idea of where you're headed so you can march in a uniform direction and get far rather than being a drunken sailor and getting nowhere.
You're free to not ignore his advice, but then your career is that of a drunken sailor. Okay, finishing your project. I'll talk about this some. If people count the number of projects you finish, not the ones you start, right? And successful projects go through this unglamorous, hard phase of trying to finish it. And it's because design is a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun to design things, to make stuff work. But, you know, some positive things. Fred Brooks, one of my heroes, says there's no winners on a losing team, no losers on a winning team. If you win, anybody involved, no matter what they did, they win. Improve productivity of team members. How can you do that? Organize each day. Figuring out when you're most alert, when you need a nap or exercise or sleep. How often should you be reading and writing, programming and email? And what I found for successful colleagues, they always use to-do lists, you know, daily, weekly, and even every 6 months to see how they're doing on their career. These days, there's this idea of agile scrum where you meet in the same place at the same time and do sprints. I think this is a pretty effective model. And then reduce a project if it's late. Again, Fred Brooks said adding people to a late project makes it later in his classic book, The Mythical Man Month. And finishing a project is how you acquire taste. How do you get great taste? If you don't finish it, you don't know really what went wrong, and it helps you pick good problems and find simple solutions. Okay, and then my friend John Hennessy, I guess President of Stanford, said this a long time ago. You can quickly tell whether or not the authors have ever built something and made it work. And if you never make it work, you don't acquire that taste. Evaluating quantitatively, never be proven wrong. Nope, if you can't be proven wrong, then you can't be proven right. And you have to, we need reproducible results. You're trying to get people to use your ideas. If they can't reproduce them, they're not going to take your word for it. So, and for better, for worse, benchmarks shape our field, and especially in the commercial world, if we have good ones, it accelerates progress. Bad ones, then there's a choice between helping sales or helping customers, and often sales wins. And then transferring technology. It's not just you write a paper and everybody starts using it. You have to go out and stump it. This last year, there's a RISC-V, which is an effort to be able to have an open instruction set, so that be an open alternative, kind of like Linux is to Microsoft Windows. So I gave talks at at 10 universities this fall to try and get the word out. Then if they kind of like the ideas, then they read the papers. Of course, if you don't pick a good problem, people aren't going to be that interested. And you can tell if it's a good problem if more people get interested over time rather than yours start to do that. I think I'm persuasive. The way I change minds is with believable numbers. And so you have to collect that quantitatively and believe it. The other thing I learned late in my career is your personality affects technology transfer. There's this person who I won't name who had a bunch of interesting ideas, and people wouldn't use them, and I talked to people in the industry about it. They hated that guy. They hated that guy. If there was any other way to do it at all, they would use it, because that would the last thing they would do. So you could be a jerk if you have the only possible solution, but it's kind of hard to do that in computing. Maybe in biology you can do that. And then product groups, people don't want to change. Product groups, there's risk associated with change. So what's worked for us, and this goes back. So Fred Brooks, when he was a graduate student, his advisor was Howard Aiken, and Fred Brooks says, I think these people are going to steal your idea. These companies are looking at his idea at Harvard University, a drum memory system. Watch out, Howard. And what Aiken said in a Southern accent, the problem in this business isn't to keep people from stealing your ideas, it's making them steal your ideas. And that's still true today, 65 years later. So what's worked for us is to find one bold group, often not the leaders, but some bold group willing to take a shot on it, and they are successful. And then kind of the rest of the field is, well, and for us, it was Sun Microsystems for RISC, and EMC for RAID, and Inktomi, and then Google for networks of workstations. But it's kind of like the rest of the field, oh, damn, they tried it, it works, okay, we'll change, right? People don't really, as much as people enjoy ideas, they don't want to take the risk. And then the other way of transferring technology is to start a company. In my 40 years, everybody I've talked to who's worked for a startup likes it doing it once. They absolutely. Now there's some people who love doing it more than once. A lot of people, once is enough. But everybody thinks it was useful. They learn a lot. And then if it works, if it works out, you see not just your ideas, but the product. And of course, you can potentially make a lot of money if that works out and become famous. The downsides are that, you learn about things you might not want to learn about, but particularly lawsuits. My friends who get lawsuits, that's less fun. And you don't get to do research and development. And then only 10% of the startups make it, right? But nevertheless, everybody thinks it was worth it for once in their life, maybe when you're younger. So I didn't really realize that there were 6 roles to being a leader of a project, and it changes over time. But that's what I believe now. So wrapping things up, and there's time for questions here, is the goal is to have impact, is to change the way people do computing and engineering in a positive way. Now, we do these 5-year projects. Now that my career is ending, I will do 12, right? They overlap, so I've been there 40 years, not 60 years. You can't tell if a project's successful for at least 10 years, and the good news is 3 of them look like they were pretty successful. They're 10 years old, so that's like kind of 25% batting average, so I'm glad I did a lot of projects. There's 2 that are finished, but haven't, it hasn't been 10 years. The Rad Lab did Spark and Mesos. Those seem promising. The PAR Lab did communication avoiding algorithms, Jim Demo, and this RISC-V stuff. But, it'll take 5 or 7 years to know how significant it was. So maybe I'll get up to, 5 out of 12, which is like 40%. But most of the projects don't work, so I'm glad I did short projects. So solve a problem other people care about, you taste that you acquire by finishing projects, and then, I think the key theme of running over my career is feedback, is figuring out ways to get feedback. Okay, with that, I'm ready for questions. I think there's a microphone here.
Oh, there's one here too.
Okay, questions? Without the first question, there won't be multiple questions. Oh, there's.
Since you asked for hard questions, which of your projects did you enjoy the most, and which of them do you think had the most impact?
Which did I enjoy the most? Let me do the most impact. Because I'm kind of wrapping things up, it's plausible RAID had the biggest impact. Everybody uses it. You know, the original RAID paper won 3 Test of Time awards. You know, if I had, it looks to me as if I try and be a neutral observer, probably RAID is the most significant so far. Which one did I enjoy the most? I try and always make projects that I really love, right? I try to make projects that if I was a graduate student, I'd just die to work on this project. You know, gee, that's hard. Maybe. Which children do you love the most? Yeah, which of my children do I love the most? I don't know. The good thing about all the projects, whether or not they're home runs, is they produce great students. And I didn't say that in the slide. There's almost 300 students in those 12 projects which was had fun adding that number up. Jeff. Oh, yeah.
So this isn't really a problem for most of us here, but would you give different advice to a pre-tenure academic versus a post-tenure academic, or do you think you can do the kinds of things you're talking about and not compromise your chances of getting tenure?
Yeah, so people asked me this time. So when Hennessy and I did the RISC stuff, which at the time was hugely controversial. If you think deep neural networks are controversial, they have there's a faculty member of another institution wrote a hit piece on me personally. David Patterson's a bad person and we were talking about instruction set design, you know. So, you know, but at the time, you know, Hennessy and I were saying, well, Digital Equipment, one of the leading computer manufacturers in the world, had a pretty stupid design, you know. So, yeah, so we didn't worry about that. Also, you have to believe in what you're doing. Right? I just can't give the advice to do something that you don't believe in and work on that, because in fact, when I visited universities and I've seen that, it's assistant professor telling me, well, I don't really like what I'm working on, but this is what I have to do to get tenure. And then I go talk to the chairman, and this guy's just doing incremental stuff. He's never going to get tenure, right? There's that gap there. You know, when you're larval, you need to make sure you publish. You know, you need to go around and give talks and stuff like that. But I think you gotta do projects you believe in. Otherwise, life's too short to work on other things. Yeah. Question here?
So you mentioned a couple times not to be a prima donna. So it's easy to identify other people being prima donnas, but how do you tell if you're being a prima donna?
Are you married? My family's really good at pointing out my flaws. Well, I think feedback is the one. I go out of my way to get feedback. If somebody hates my papers, I send them new papers because they tell me the honest thing to do. I would like to think, if I'm acting like a jerk, that you know, I'm pretty sure my friends or my family would tell me that. I think you could ask. Right? I think you can ask, right? Geez, I mean, people are afraid to tell you something, if not. But I think if you asked, did I handle that well or not, you do it. I think some people in academia think that's the way that's the way people know that you're famous. You've had some success, you start acting differently, and it's just bad career advice. Okay, other questions?
So full disclosure, I went to Berkeley and experienced one of these projects. So I'm
Amin was on the Network of Workstation project.
I'm biased toward the model. My question is, given the success of the model, why do you think more universities haven't adopted it? I mean, even though it seems like the stuff you're saying is really obvious, it's also somewhat rare.
Yeah, I got that exact same question at Berkeley. I think this time I'll be less humble. You have to have somebody who's willing to lead, right? for some reason, even though wrestling, as I'll tell you, I wrestled in high school and college as an individual sport, I had great wrestling coaches who realized we'd be more successful if we bonded as a team, even though it was an individual sport. So I had that kind of role model going up. And so I think I'm good at, kind of organizing teams. So you have to have somebody who's willing to do that. The institution itself, Berkeley, told me day one have impact. They didn't have any problem with multiple people working on it. When you're an assistant professor, you make up rules. Like, I have to have only sole authored papers, otherwise I get credit. But that's not true. So the institution let us happen. I think it was helpful that I'm a good leader of people. But there's lots of good leaders of people around. I don't understand why that doesn't happen more. Like I said, it seems common sense. It's not like I've kept this a secret for 40 years. I've been telling people at lots of institutions. So I'm not sure, but we're a lunatic fringe, right? We put a group together. It's a different group with interdisciplinary mix and match. We tackle a problem. We've already visited you guys on the next project to get some feedback on it. I don't know why more people don't do it. You have to ask them. Why don't more people? You should ask them. Why don't you guys act like Berkeley? I'm sure they'd love that. There's probably a nearby. There's probably a nearby university you could.
I think we have about 5 or 6 more minutes.
Okay, then all right. With that, then I need to give my quickly give my life story. Okay, so I'm an accidental CS student. I was a math major and wrestler in high school and college. At the end of my junior year, the math class was canceled. I had to take a course. There was no CS major, so I just took an intro to computer science, and I was hooked. That was it. My senior year, I took every computer course I could. I'm an accidental student. I went to UCLA, graduate student. I just casually mentioned at the end of one of those courses to a new PhD that, boy, I'd sure rather do this than work in a factory to pay my way to college. And he, on his own, went and found me a job as an undergraduate student. While I was an undergraduate student, even though it was near the end of my senior year, that wasn't too late to go to graduate school. And I asked my wife about a master's degree. She said, sure, it's only 4 or 5 quarters. And then when I got into the office, everybody else in my office was getting a PhD, so I thought maybe I should get a PhD, so I decided to do that. We lived on a research assistant salaries, my wife and 2 kids and I. We were at poverty level at that time. And then the project ended, and I lost my RA-ship. My advisor helped get me a job at an aerospace company, Hughes Aircraft, and then it was touch and go whether I'd ever finish my PhD because I was working 20, 30, 40 hours. But I did mean it. I'm an accidental Berkeley professor. My wife grew up in right next door to Berkeley, and when I was graduating on the interview tour, she says, I can't help but think you're going to end up with Berkeley. And I said, look, Berkeley's up here, UCLA's down here. I'm graduating. This is never going to happen. But she forced me, as a graduate student, to call the chairman of the department at Berkeley Computer Science to find out about my application. So I called this guy. He said, well, Dave, you're in the top 10, but not the top 5. And at the time, I'm thinking, wow, that wasn't so bad. So it turns out he said that to anybody who called. but then he took my application. Yeah, that seems interesting. Handed it to somebody visiting Southern California. We had a good conversation. They invited me back to the interview and got a job offer. I barely got tenure. The first project I already told you about, it was way too ambitious. I did the sabbatical and did the RISC stuff. Tenure wasn't easy. I was one of those guys that was using conferences where the whole campus used journals but us, so I was the guinea pig that went through that. And the RISC stuff was pretty new, but I got it. After that, things got better, but I still get papers rejected by those jerks on the programming committee. And so what have I learned? What works for me? For me, it was maximizing personal happiness versus personal wealth. That's always been my guideline. Believe in this country, you think wealth is happiness. There's unhappy billionaires, right, in this world. They're not the same thing. Family first, especially in that kind of job. People ask you to do things, your family can go down the list. I made my family first, so I did. We had my wife and I had 2 sons, so I did Indian guides. I was the Cub Scout leader. I was the soccer coach when there were field trips out there. So when my rebellious teenage boy grew up, you were never there. And I said, Indian guides, Cub Scouts. So I went down the list and he said, oh, okay, maybe. Passion, courage, and optimism. You might be able to tell I'm a passionate guy. I have to believe the thing I'm doing is going to possibly change the world. My optimism story goes back to high school. Started dating this girl who was dating older guys who had Corvettes and stuff like that. Nevertheless, after a couple dates, I asked her if she would go steady with me. That was what you say at the time. She'd just been dating older guys and didn't know what to say. She says, well, I don't know how to say no. So me, being an optimist and a logical person, not a no is a yes. So I said, great, and I hugged her. And she said, I'll let this guy down later. But we've been married 48 years now, so so I think that's okay. And then, I think we swing for the fences, right? That's that thing. Now, another thing, this is a saying that a colleague told me that's actually a couple hundred years old. Friends come and go, but enemies accumulate. So this kind of, ironically, the physical courage that comes with wrestling has, to me, been intellectual courage. So when I was president of ACM, the person in charge of DARPA was cutting back on academic funding. So I decided to take him on with my friend Ed Lazowska in Washington, and we tried to get people from other universities to join us. But they were afraid this guy would be vengeful and cut him off, I think with good reason. But so it was just us taking him on with editorials and science magazine stuff. So this guy was not a fan of us. Now, but we hadn't quite realized, this is unintentional, but the other saying is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we made a lot of friends. But keep that in mind. Winning as a team versus an individual. In my DNA, I believe a team of, average people can work together and beat superstars. And then I've already quoted Fred Brooks about that line. Seek out honest feedback and learn from it. It's easy to avoid feedback, but that's how you get better. The one warning sign I can pass on from my 40 years, always dangerous, is when somebody thinks they're the smartest person in the room. There's a person in my field who thinks he's the smartest person in the room, and everybody hates that guy. There was a president of a university who thought he's smartest. That person was fired for doing a lousy job. The people who founded Enron thought they were the smartest people in the room. They went to prison. And I even have a relative who thought he was the smartest person in the room, and he's a convicted felon. So why would that be? Why would this person, they're probably smart, if they think they're the smartest, why would it be such a bad sign? I think it's that they don't want feedback from anybody. If you're the smartest person in the room, you don't need to talk to anybody about your ideas. So I think, anyways, run away if you find something like that. This thing happened to me. It was like God spoke in my ear one morning. And I remember waking up, and it's not how many projects you start, it's how many you finish. It was like in my head, like somebody was telling me what to do. So ever since that's what I've done. So what I do is one big project at a time. I do other things, but there's one big thing at a time. So when Hennessy and I were doing our textbook, that was the big thing that I did that year. When I was president of ACM, I took a sabbatical, so that was the one big thing I did there that year. And so it turns out if you do one big thing a year, over 30 years you can get a lot of things done. But a lot of academics particularly will work on 1,000 things at once and not finish very many of them. And then have fun. To be successful, you do have to work hard. Our long-lost colleague Jim Gray, even in his 60s, he'd do one all-nighter a month. So you have to work hard to be successful, but you have to have fun. As far as we know, you only get one chance at this, and if you get to the end without having any fun, you've wasted a lot of opportunities. I can put up a lot of stuff. As long as I play soccer every Sunday, I can have a good time. So that's my advice. Thanks very much.